whenever we get a vehicle in for a simple repair that needs a lot of stuff, any of us that have seen a lot of that kind of thing, we'll usually put the safety related stuff on the top. There's people that sometimes we can make a laundry list, but sometimes they come to us with one. And when we make one, sometimes we'll scare them off because, if your shop becomes the shop that's always telling people that you need lots and lots and lots of work, upsell is good, but you can overdo it, and you can get a reputation for trying to sell people the moon. Some of savvy customers too will probably try to go and get a second opinion. Now, if we've got loose front end parts or worn out brakes or anything that's safety related, steering or whatever, that's something they obviously need to be told about. Now, what I like to do, of course, if the customer is shocked by the price you're giving them, there are going to be issues there. A lot of the places that I've seen will, and I've seen more than one or two places do this, in trying to upsell, they'll actually tell a customer something is wrong with their front end or their brakes or something that's downright spooky, that'll scare them. And then the customer will either say, yes, hurry up and do it so I don't die, or they'll say, well, let me go get somebody else to look at that. Now, when the shop tells them that they have really, really serious problems, you know what I mean? Like my aunt's vehicle, which I got on the screen behind me, she actually said she had gone to the local Firestone store and for some little simple something, I don't remember what it was, an oil change or whatever, and they were telling her she needed all kinds of front end work and that she was going to crash and burn and all this kind of thing. And so she had called me and I said, well, we'll bring it over here and we'll raise it up on the lift and have a look at it. When she did, there was nothing wrong with her car. There was no busted boots, there was no looseness in any of the steering parts, and I don't really get, she was an elderly woman with an old white Crown Victoria, but it really didn't have all that many miles on it, and I just knew that stuff wasn't that bad. And when I looked at it, I verified that there wasn't a whole lot wrong with it. This is a serious business that we're dealing with here. All right, so what you got to do, there's another one here. My doctor's daughter, military, he had a daughter that was, well, he had 4 daughters, and one of his daughters was overseas in Italy. And she had a Honda Element that hadn't been driven in about 7 or 8 months, and it was just sitting there, in their garage or whatever. And my doctor, he decided he was going to drive it a little bit, keep it limbered up, because it hadn't been driven in so long. And so he fired it up and drove it, and he noticed the brakes were making an awful racket. I don't know if it was sitting in the garage. It may have been parked behind the house. It must have been, because anyway, he took it over to the dealer, and it was still under warranty now. This thing wasn't all that old. And they told him that he had been abusing the brakes and they needed to rebuild all the brakes. It wasn't going to be covered under warranty, and it was going to be nearly $1,000. And so he just told him to put it back together and he would take it with him. And so he brought it over there, or he had one of his other daughters who was in my program at the time brought it to me. And the only thing we found wrong with that one was the rear rotors were rusty because it had been sitting up and hadn't been driven. And all we had to do to fix that was sand the rotors, because they didn't even need to be machined. Got all that rust off of them, and we filed the brake pad so it wouldn't have rust particles in there causing them to squeak and all that kind of stuff. And we put it back together, and all of that problem was fixed. There was nothing wrong with any of the rest of the brakes. Now, what happens when somebody does that and they go to another place, then the other place tells them what's really wrong with it. We got issues here, Well, we got this thing. What you got to do if you're going to do it right is you need to show them. If you're going to sell them something, you need to go to them. And I knew this one guy, that same dealership I was talking about, they used to have one crappy looking old used up rotor, and he would show it to all of his customers and claim it came off their car. I heard one of the other mechanics talking about how that guy would do that. And apparently he had gotten away with that for quite some time. But anyway, when the customer comes over there, what I always tried to do is I would always say, let me take you to the car and I'm going to show you what the problem is. And Einstein said, if you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. That being said, there's some people that'll say, like they're understanding what you're telling them, when actually they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And some of them are sharp enough to where they can say, yeah, I see where that's leaking. I see where it needs to do. Now, I knew some other people had unscrupulous behavior where they would squirt some oil under the oil pan so it would drip off the oil pan, and then they say, oh, look at this. And there was a transmission shop I knew about that would run a grinder and put metal in a transmission pan, show it to a customer so they'd, got to get them to pay for a transmission overhaul and all that. That customers that come to us expect us to be honest with them, and most of them don't mind paying as long as you're fixing it. I mean, they'll pay a pretty good price if you're fixing the car and you're doing legitimate repairs. There's one shop around here, the guy that owns it, it's basically a tire store, but they do other work too. I've known this guy. We rode horses together when we were little kids and all that. And his dad had, been in the tire and front end business and all, did brakes and all that stuff. Anyway, he opened him a shop long years ago. He's been in business for 40 years, and he is somebody that I know for absolute certain will not ever try to sell anybody anything they don't need. A lot of these people, they don't mind paying the price. If you can charge them a good price. I got another friend that I told what my dad said. There was a guy one time that was wanting a trick deal price from my dad. And my dad said that, and the guy was actually, I think he was an interim pastor at our church or something. And the pastor said, is that a preacher's price you're giving me? And my dad says, that's the same price I give everybody, because the scripture says different weights and different balances are an abomination. I told my friend this that was opening a shop about 10 years ago, and he subscribed to that principle. Everybody pays the same price, except his mother or somebody like that. And so that has stood him in good stead because he's made good money, because he doesn't charge lower prices to his buddy than he does to the customer off the street. He charges everybody exactly the same hourly rate, and he goes by the labor book, a labor guide. Some shops will just make up a price off the top of their head, like the one that told them they needed a air conditioner compressor, and it was going to cost $1,000 on a 2010 Altima, I think it was, and we had just done one like that. And the one on the Altima that we did, it was 0.8 of an hour to change the compressor. And whenever they asked the people at this other shop, why is it so much money? And they said, well, 8 hours of it's labor. Well, all you got to do is look at it. But the customer doesn't have access to the labor guide. And so they were basically pulling the wool over their eyes. And this business has got enough problems without that kind of stuff going on. I don't know how it is in your area, but all around here, whenever I was running the automotive department at the college and we did lots and lots of live work, I would hear horror stories from people. And I've mentioned them on here several times, and I'm not, campaigning against, shops getting a good day's work for a day's pay and all that. But, if it's fixed and you stand behind your work, you need to be charging a good price for that. Well, this was one, an 80 model Renault. Quit while driving, couldn't do. I can't remember if it's an Encore or an Alliance, but you remember one that had a little ignition module up on the bulkhead with a little vacuum. It was the older ignition. I think it might have 83 Alliance or something like that. Anyway, this guy brought it over there. He was a construction foreman or a construction company owner. He brought his employee over there, and they said, "It's quit while driving." And when we bought the Jeep Renault franchise back in the 80s, they sent me to school about 7 or 8 times the last part of 1988. I went to school on every doggone thing they could think of up there. And one of the things we were taught at school, the instructor's name was Dick Kennedy. He was a really good instructor up in Atlanta. And he says, on these particular units here, if you've got one that's quitting while you're driving, reach back there behind where the wire connectors plug into the module and massage the potting material, because it was soft potting material. He says if you massage that potting material and that engine stalls, then you've got a ignition module problem, and that's what you need to do first. And I followed the factory training procedures, because that's what he said to do, because I couldn't get it to quit. And so after I did that, swapped out that module, I found out you had to drive it a long way on a hot day for it to ever quit. And so I hooked up a meter to the crank sensor and stuff, and I drove it 30 or 40 miles. And finally, when it quit, I noticed the crank sensor had opened up, and I had cooled that off so I could get it fired up and drove back to the shop. And the guy that owned the vehicle and the boss man of his that brought him in there were absolutely convinced that they did not need the first part that I put on there, in spite of the fact that I followed the protocols. Sometimes it seems like that to the customer. Some of them are going to complain all the time anyway, no matter what you do. One way or another, we got the car fixed and didn't charge them for the second repair, but whatever. Now this one here, some jobs are just tough. Here's a 2005 Nissan Pathfinder with all these miles on it. Instrument clusters going crazy things, doing crazy things. Replace the heater core and do an alignment. That's that's a sort of a laundry list. Initially, when they called me to tell me about this car, all they told me was the instrument cluster was going crazy. That's all they said. And then they brought it in with all of these other things they wanted to add to it. So I said, well, we'll go ahead and look at this. Sure enough, the heater core was leaking, and so I had put this other guy on it. But let me tell you about that again in a minute. We also had a 2005 F-150 with an inoperative moonroof stuck in the open position, no tail lights, erratic gas gauge. We had a 2009 Silverado with a stable track message, tire pressure monitor message, a gaggle of inoperative busted light, inoperative door lights. We had a Tacoma losing coolant, and a Lexus that wouldn't take gas, and a 2009 F-150 that had an intermittent transmission problem. So this was a laundry list of vehicles. And that's never a bad thing, because when I was teaching over there, giving all these students, one of the things that I had found out, if you put a student to work on a trainer vehicle, they are not in the least interested in doing anything to that trainer vehicle except just, halfway, patching everything. And you got to really stay after them and use a cattle prod to get them to put everything back together and all that. So if you give them real work to do, I found out, they get excited about that because somebody's going to be driving that vehicle, and the best evaluator is the customer. And I typically had better luck teaching if I did lots of live work, as long as I satisfied the NATEF task list, which is now ASEF, I call it, the Education Foundation. But we went ahead and went to work on this thing right here, the F-150. Let's start with that. The inoperative moonroof stuck in the open position. What I did with that was I discovered that the motor, on the moonroof motor, and it was, he had actually had a towel up there because it was raining in there. And I took the headliner down and found out that the motor was fried, the actual motor itself. And he didn't want to pay $300 for a motor. He was an interesting guy. When he brought the truck in there, he came in there dressed like he just stepped off a SWAT team. He had his flak jacket on and said police on the back of it, all this stuff. But anyhow, I got took the housing off of the moonroof motor, and I turned the motor armature with my fingers until I got the moonroof completely closed. And I got it good closed up really good and tight. And then I disconnected the wires from the motor, and I put the headliner back up. That's what the guy wanted to do. He did not want to fool with that. Okay, so he had these taillight issue, and this right here was a strange thing. That connector under the truck looked to me like somebody had built a fire under there and melted it. It was just really weird. An erratic gas gauge, same problem. So we cut the connector out. We didn't want to go looking for a connector. We want to get this guy's truck fixed so he can drive it. And I think it was a salvage vehicle anyway. As a matter of fact, when I looked under the windshield on this one, where the VIN number is, the VIN number had been drilled off of this thing and scraped off the door, so I didn't even know what the VIN number was. Well, this guy was a police officer anyway, and I think he had probably bought it at auction after the druggie people had something. He got the truck through police stuff some kind of way, and how he had a title for it or anything, I have no idea. We were just working on the truck. Who cares? He's a cop. Let him do what he wants to. One way or another, we cut all these connectors out of here, and we soldered and heat shrinked every wire one at a time and taped it up and just made it to one harness. Unless somebody's going to be taking the truck apart and putting it back together, well, I don't see where that's a problem. If they are, that's their problem, basically. All right, now let's move on to the next thing we got going on here. The 2001 Tacoma was a hunting truck. It was losing coolant. The head gasket was leaking into one of the cylinders. I don't even remember now which one it was. But at his request, we replaced the plugs and put Blue Devil in there. Use the Blue Devil stuff. It works pretty good sometimes. I've seen it about 50% of the time. Blue Devil is a good temporary fix. That's my personal evaluation of it. I have seen it do things I didn't expect it to do as far as fixing vehicles. There was one Nissan 4-cylinder that came in there that she was having trouble starting it because it would have water on top of the pistons, and all. And we ran some Blue Devil through it because the girl had no money whatsoever. You know, you got to drain all the coolant, you run it through there, and you follow the instructions on the can to a T. A can of that stuff costs about $60, and you don't use the whole can on the one vehicle. Anyway, that fixed that Nissan, and for the time being, it fixed this one here too. We went ahead and but we put new plugs in. See how that rust is on that plug right there? That right there is an indication coolant's been getting in there. He didn't have to add water even a month later. I don't know how long that's going to last, but oh well, you know. So we fixed that one up, and it was a hunting truck anyways. It wasn't his primary ride. He only drove it sometimes on the weekend, and he never went all that far from home on it, you know. So whatever. All right, this '99 Lexus wouldn't take gas. We did a short search, easy fix. Dirt dauber built a nest in that vent tube, and there's all kinds of dirt daubers around here. Dirt daubers are they stop up everything. You know, if you've had anything that's been parked for a while and it's clogged up, you need to go looking for a dirt dauber nest because they'll go in there and build something to clog it up. All right, so the heater core, we had it all ripped apart there. Heater core was replaced. The heater pipe manifold, that one that runs all the way across the back and has that electric water pump in it, you know, those things, if you breathe on them, they'll break anyway. And so I had like a $200 manifold. We put that on there. Although occasionally, on another vehicle like this, I actually, it was broke off, and I actually tapped it with threads and put a pipe fitting in there that was a good solid fix. But this one here was broke in ways that we couldn't fix it, and so they went ahead and paid us to do that. Well, we had to jack the front of the vehicle way up at an angle to get all the air out of it. That's what I had found out about these Nissan Pathfinders with these V6s in them. If you're going to get the air out of them, in spite of the fact that the coolant, the filler neck is higher than the engine, you still need to put a jack under it and raise that thing up just as high as you can jack it up, put stands under it, and bleed it that way, and you'll have a lot better luck getting the air out of the coolant system. And that's what we had to do with these every time we did one. All right, so we attempted an alignment, and we found out that the bolts on the rear control arms were seized up. As a matter of fact, we were trying to get that one fixed up. In other words, and it twisted off. So, well, we may have to drive it out of there. So we couldn't drive it out of there because it was rusted up in there. So what we wound up doing, I got a skill saw. I put a metal cutting blade on it, and we cut that out of there. Cut that that lower A-frame. Just cut it to get it out of there. And then we took the 4-inch high-speed cutter and we cut the bolt. And anyway, when the smoke cleared, we had a new lower control arm on it, and we were able to, finish our work up and everything. But what they told us was this one here had lived at the beach for most of its life, The cluster problem, was going crazy, and it would do wacky stuff, and this would go, to dashes and all that kind of stuff. And the picoscope didn't really show us any kind of a pattern that was raising our eyebrows, so I disconnected all the modules one at a time to see if disconnecting any of the other modules, the instrument cluster would go online, and start working. Well, it never did. So what we did was we got a used cluster for $75. I had them go pick us one up from the salvage yard, and it's plug and play. We plugged that sucker in, and the instrument cluster went working just fine. Our miles had changed on it, but that wasn't anything we did on purpose, and they knew about it. So actually, when you replace an instrument cluster with another one, you're supposed to put a little sticker on the door saying original cluster had this many miles on it, and the cluster we put on here had this many miles on it. And in the olden days, whenever you replaced a cluster, the 10th digit, if it had a wheel in there, would be red. And what I would do, if I was replacing a cluster when I was at the Ford place, I would pull the little drum, the little wheel, the drum that had the miles on it, out of the old odometer head, and I would drop it into the new one so the miles would be exactly the same. Now, unless there was a specific problem with that odometer making noise or something, that was never a problem. You had to know how to do it. One time there was a mechanic from across the shop saw me working on that, and he came over there with stars in his eyes and says, "Wow, how do you do this?" I said, "What are you talking about? How do you do this?" He said, I want to know how to do this." I said, "Why do you want to know how to do this? What are you going to do, roll the miles back on your truck or something? I'm putting this like it's supposed to be." And the shop foreman was somewhat confused by that. He didn't know about what we ought to be doing about that in those days. And customers, a lot of people don't know it, but one customer had us put a speedometer in his Explorer speedometer head, the mechanic in the next service bay did it, had the red numbers on it, and he put the sticker on the door and all. And as soon as the customer saw these red numbers on that 10th digit, he drove it straight over to our used car department and said, I just had my instrument cluster replaced. I see red numbers on the 10th digit. What's that going to do to my trade-in value? And the used car salesman said, you're going to lose 25% of your late trade-in value as soon as any car lot sees that red digit, because they really don't know how many miles are on this car, and they're going to err on the side of caution. And so they asked the guy can you do something about this? And the other mechanic says, no, I'm not fooling with that. I got paid for my work. It's his problem. And so they asked me to fix it. And so I pulled the cluster out and got his old odometer drum, with his original miles on it, and popped them back in there, put it all back together, and he drove away a happy man. Sometimes we got to kind of go the extra mile to help somebody out like that. All right, so this 2009 F-150 was very interesting. It had an intermittent no reverse. Sometimes it would stick in third gear, clear the codes, and to clean up its act. Anytime I've ever seen a situation, and I'm not saying it's like this every time, but whenever I've seen a situation, I've seen little old Chryslers and all kinds of stuff. If you've got one that starts acting up and doesn't want to work right until you clear the codes, then there's a fairly good bet you've got a transmission controller or a PCM issue, depending on what's controlling transmission shifts. And I've seen that more than a few times. In this particular case, I said this has got to be something with the transmission computer. Well, this is the transmission computer on that one. They call it a lead frame. And it's actually mounted on the throttle body, and it's got sensors built into it and all that kind of stuff. And so, anyway, we discovered a couple of things. The transmission shop that had worked on it before it brought to us had managed to reinstall the valve body with that adapter broken. Now, that's not a good idea. You're going to lose pressure there. If you pull air in there, you can burn up the torque converter if the pump is pulling fluid from that spot. And, anyway, you can't just replace the lead frame on a 2009 model F-150. You got to replace the entire valve body. I went by the Ford place where one of my graduates worked, and I got one of these. He had one of these in his toolbox that he had saved, and we replaced that with this one. And we actually, when I was talking to him, he actually says, call up there, go by the parts department and see if they've got a lead frame. So they gave me a lead frame, and it was $125. And so I said, well, I'll just pop this on there and we'll take care of it. Well, that was a weird thing. The only problem, when we put it all back together with that lead frame on that valve body, the transmission wouldn't engage at all. And the TCM, this lead frame, was got the TCM built into it, wouldn't even talk to the scan tool. And I thought, well, that's wacky. It looked exactly like it and everything. And it turned out we could plug the old lead frame into the wires and let them swing, and it would talk to the scan tool just fine. So I'm saying, what the heck is this about? And then I found out, Ford told us that for decades, now this is something I was going to follow up and say that I almost forgot. Ford used to tell us for years that transmission electronics could not cause no engagement. They would make hard shifts because it's going to raise the pressure if the electronics are dark and all. This particular one wasn't like that. With the absence of the electronics, this one dumps the pressure instead of raising it. This later model F-150 was a 6R80. You can actually change the lead frame on the later models. I think the 09 was by itself. Don't quote me on that and do your research. But if you just try to change the lead frame on an 09, you're going to run into this problem. Okay, we had to put the entire valve body on this one in order to get it straightened out, and it drove out of there and worked just fine. But we learned about that lead frame anomaly because on the later models you can replace the lead frame by itself, and it will, everything works just fine. But it was just odd to me that on this one, the TCM wouldn't talk and the truck wouldn't pull. It was a big difference on that. So on the stable track issue on the Silverado was, we had to replace the steering angle sensor, which if you've done one of those, it's not a horrible job, but it's also not one of those things where you just reach under the dash and push, pull, snap, click. I had to get my guy to pull the steering column off, put it in a vise, and dissect it, and replace that sensor. The Silverado's door lock switch had been wet. When we replaced it, we got 2 operative locks. See, and you see how grungy and green those were? It would have to have door lock actuators, and they didn't want the door lock actuators. They just wanted the one door lock actuator to work so they could get in and out of the driver's door. Tough stuff is what we're going to be dealing with anytime we work on lots of different kinds of cars. I will tell you that when I was at the Ford dealer and we weren't working on anything but Fords, I got handicapped to the point to where I would be a little bit lost when I was working on something that wasn't a Ford, particularly something we didn't. That was before the days of all data, and if we didn't have any kind of literature on something, so I had to go hunt that. I really didn't like winging it without any books to read. You know, I mean, my dad did that for years working on foreign cars when he first started in the early 60s. And you could do that back then. There was a time when the hardest electrical problem that we had was turn signals and power windows and stuff. But the long and the short of it is, the more different kinds of cars you work on, the sharper you'll get. There's always going to be some you don't like. I worked at the Volkswagen dealer for a year and enjoyed working on Volkswagens back then. But the newer model Volkswagens have got all kinds of quirky stuff. If you're not used to working on those, you'll get smacked around by them. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know it, but these later model Volkswagens, if somebody has replaced the radio, there's a pretty good chance that when you plug your scan tool in to one that's had the radio replaced, you're going to destroy your scan tool. You might have gotten away without that, but it is a bad bet, I found out, to plug a scan tool into one that somebody has put an aftermarket radio in. So just be really, really, really careful about that kind of thing on these later models, you know, that's got the screen in the middle of the dash and all that. So anyway, I could tell a lot of other stories right now, but I think I'm going ahead and I want you to, everybody to remember our fallen soldiers on Memorial Day because we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the people that did the fighting. My dad and my father-in-law both, you know, fought in World War II in Korea and all that. Didn't lose them. That's for Veterans Day. Memorial Day is for the soldiers that went off to war and didn't come home. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. And until next time.